My name is Liz Reed. I'm the head of adult services here at the Moore Memorial Library, and welcome tonight on this toasty August night for our program. If you're looking for something nice to do in an air-conditioned space tomorrow night, Heath Umbright, one of our librarians here, is doing their next installment of Be Media-Wise, How Information Spreads. Now keep an eye out, because the second Tuesday of the month rolls around real quick in September. They'll also be talking about how to spot AI-generated information. So, maybe come to August and then come to September. If you have not silenced your cell phones, please do so. We have water at the front of the room. And the restroom on the second floor is just out past the reference desk and on your right-hand side. So if you're here tonight, you may be interested in some current events as well as legal issues. It's a good time to remind everybody that every weekday, except for holidays, the law librarians in Massachusetts do an hour of drop-in time on Zoom for anybody to tune in and ask questions. If you can't find information about something legal, if you can't find the right form, they can help you try to find that information. To be clear, they're not giving legal advice, but it is a great resource here in Massachusetts. We have all of the links posted on our calendar. So you can just go to our calendar, you don't need to dig around online. We have the links posted. You can even come here and use one of our computers in a private room. So speaking of air-conditioned spaces. In fact, we actually have the head law librarian in Norfolk, Alexander Furtado, coming here in just a couple of weeks on August 26th to talk about landlord-tenant legal issues in Massachusetts. That program is almost full. So even if you don't get a spot, we are hoping that we're going to be partnering with NCM for that program as well to help us reach a wider audience. So you can catch it on the rebroadcast. So thank you for joining us tonight, NCM, and helping us reach a wider audience with our programs. Tonight, we're here for Restoring the Promise, a discussion about immigration, democracy, and a path forward. We're very excited to be hosting attorney Antonia Masaviana, a nationally recognized immigration attorney and the founder of Masaviana Law. An immigrant himself, Antonio arrived at the U.S. at age 12 and later became the first known undocumented attorney admitted to the Massachusetts bar. With that, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Thank you, Liz. Well, first, thank you, Liz, and the library for opening up the space. Thank you all for taking time of your beautiful summer night to be here and learn a little bit more about immigration. Thank you, Thales, for putting this PowerPoint together for us today to guide our discussion. Thank you, my wife, for always being present. And let me begin by telling you that we're going to talk about immigration today, and I don't know where anybody's political leanings are, and I promise that I'm not here to offend anybody, okay? I think immigration is an issue that unfortunately politicians on both sides of the aisle have failed us for many years. Obviously, we are under a Republican administration here, which doesn't mean that there were not failures under a Democratic administration that led to where we are today, okay? So I just want to make sure that you understand that I am not here to be political. But some of the things I will say will sound political, because politics isn't everything that we do in life, right? And it should be that way, because, again, it's the reality that we live in, and it's also part of who we are as a nation, right? We want to talk about things, we want to discuss things. But do remember that I will try to keep this, as nonpartisan as I can. Because really the goal here, again, is not political advocacy towards one party or another, but really talk about immigration itself. Liz started by saying that I came to the United States when I was 12. And it's true, I moved here to Brooklyn, New York. That's where I grew up. And eventually moved to Massachusetts about 25 years ago. Came here as a journalist and ended up staying. I also did not have status for the best part of over 20 years, despite the fact that my mom immigrated to the United States when she was 15. And 2 of my siblings were actually born here. So eventually she returned to Brazil, where I was born. And she was back and forth for a couple of, she was back and forth a couple of times. I eventually came here when I was 12. I was also back and forth for a few times. But because of the complexities of our immigration system, I too ended up without status for many, many years. In fact, over 2 decades. And at some point, working both as a journalist, as a community organizer, I realized that my next step was the law because of all that I had been exposed to. And I decided I was going to become an attorney. But of course, the barrier to that was my legal immigration status. In fact, most of my peers, community organizers, they would say to me, there's no way you're going to get into law school. There's no way a law school is going to accept you without status. There's no way that even if you get into law school, you're going to be able to take the bar exam. And even if you pass the bar exam, there is no way that they're going to admit somebody who has no legal status. Well, here I am. It all happened, okay? So I was lucky enough to, after, it wasn't easy. I applied to several law schools. I had a law school that actually, once they accepted my application and offered me a really good scholarship, pulled the scholarship offer once they realized that I had no status. You see, when you apply for a college here, the question asks about status is whether you are a citizen, a legal resident, or other, right? It doesn't go into details about whether you have status, no status, whether you're here on the student visa, right? So what happens is colleges usually will accept the person, and then if you check other, they will ask for more information about what does other mean. So okay, so you're not a citizen, you don't have a green card, what kind of status do you have? And then at the point where I would go and say, well, I don't actually have any, right? Some law schools would say, oh, well, wait a minute. But I was lucky enough that law school in Rhode Island accepted me. It was a pretty young law school at the time. I just actually saw on LinkedIn yesterday that they've been chosen as one of the best law schools in the country, which is great. I received an amazing education there. And I had to work really hard because I understood that once I completed my schooling, I would have to be sitting for the bar. And again, I had no status. Went all the way to the Rhode Island Supreme Court to be able to petition, to be able to sit for the exam as somebody without status. Got authorization to sit for the exam. And took the bar exam both in Rhode Island and in Massachusetts because I had no idea what was going to happen if I passed on the exam, right? And I passed on both bars, but then Rhode Island said, unfortunately, as much as we would love to, I was a good student. I was editor-in-chief of the Law Review at my school. I had won a few competitions for the school, including one before the Rhode Island Supreme Court. So they knew who I was, right? So they said, well, unfortunately, we cannot allow you to get a license because you have no status, even though we realized that you did pass the bar. However, Massachusetts, on the other hand, sent me a letter saying, this is your swearing-in date. And I was sworn in as the first undocumented lawyer in Massachusetts way back when. So, which was a pretty big achievement and opened the doors for other people who had no status to be able to go to law school and become lawyers themselves. I never forget the first time I was in immigration court and I was defending this gentleman and talking to the judge about his family and about why I didn't think that it would be just and fair for him to be deported when I myself, right? And I quickly realized, I'm like, this judge has actually the power to deport me. Anyway, there's more about that. You can, if you Google my name, there's a few stories. The Boston Globe published an article when Rhode Island finally gave me my license. And you can learn a little bit more about me. I do run a law firm today. We're about 30 people in a law firm. We're 4 lawyers. We're about to hire a 5th lawyer now. And we help people from all over the world doing family-based immigration, humanitarian-based immigration, employment-based immigration, healthcare immigration, and there's a whole list of services that we do. But let's talk about, I'm in Southborough, actually. Southborough, Mass, yeah. We used to be in Framingham. We needed some more space, so we went a little further west to be able to get a larger space to fit everybody. Immigration, as you know, is constantly on the news these days. And unfortunately, a lot of what you hear is not great. We all know, right, or we all say that we, the United States, are a nation of immigrants. I grew up hearing that. Grew up in New York, huge immigrant population in New York City. But what's happening today is really an effort not to fix an immigration system which for a long time has been broken. Our immigration system is really broken. But what is happening today under the guise of let's fix immigration is really social engineering, I think. Because a lot of the changes that have been implemented in the last 6 months are not attacking unauthorized migration. They're not dealing with the issue of 11 million people who are in these states undocumented, but they're in fact exacerbating the problem by making more people undocumented, by making more people lose their immigration status. And that's crazy to think that because, again, our immigration problems are historic, and I'm going to go through a little timeline. We're going to talk about that. But you would expect that if people are serious about resolving or solving the immigration challenges that we have, they would put into place policies that will actually reduce the number of unauthorized migrants and bring people into a better position. But we're not seeing that. Let me see if my... So DHS is in the process of stripping millions of people of status. There is something in the law called temporary protected status, and it's something that is statutory, so it exists. It was passed by Congress. And at the discretion of the executive, you basically can determine that citizens or nationals from a specific country, because of what's going on in their country, it may be war, turmoil, it may be a hurricane like it happened in Honduras, it may be an earthquake, but for whatever reason, right, the government deems that these people cannot return safely to their country. They're here, they don't have status, so they provide what is called temporary protected status, which basically means you can stay in the United States for now. We're going to give you a work authorization. We're going to allow you the chance to travel and see your relatives abroad if you need to. And you have this quasi-legal status. Well, one of the first things that this administration has done was to rescind TPS for over 1 million people. For Haitians, there were over 5,000 Haitians on temporary protected status. They rescinded the status. So they overnight made these people who were in this quasi-lawful status into unlawful migrants. They did that to 1 million TPS holders. People from Nepal, people from Nicaragua, from Honduras, from El Salvador, from Venezuela. And the administration is basically saying, you know what, those countries are now safe, people can return there. You can Google Venezuela and Haiti anytime you want, and you're going to realize that there are obviously no safe conditions for people to return to. But again, right, not solving the issue, but actually exacerbating the problem by making people unlawful. Thales, I don't think this is working, so I'll maybe, yeah, let me while you try that. Just go back here. The administration revoked the parole status for almost another 1 million people. 500,000 who came in on a program called the Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela parole program. What was that? The prior administration, in trying to deal with the flow of people on the border, right? They're trying to figure out, okay, how do we do this? How do we control the entry of people here, and how do we organize this? They basically created a program that allowed nationals from those 4 countries who had family members here to be able to be paroled into the United States lawfully and be here for a couple of years while their families got their status in order. So they were paroled in. They were basically given permission to enter. Now parole, I'm not going to get into a lot of legal and legalese here, but parole is not really an admission. It's not really, yes, come into the United States. It's just permission to enter. Okay, and it can be revoked at any time. And guess what the administration did as soon as they came in? They also revoked that parole status, making people, thousands of people, unlawful migrants like this. Okay, so again, right, exacerbating the problem. The administration is now engaged in dismissing court cases of people who are in immigration court right now, applying for asylum protection or for adjustment of status, which is a green card, or anything else, so that once they walk out of court with their cases dismissed, they are now picked up by ICE, who puts them in a process called expedited removal. Now, theoretically, when they are working through their cases in immigration court, they are protected from deportation. But then the prosecutor, the trial attorney, like the equivalent of the prosecutor in immigration court, steps up and tells the judge, Your Honor, we're no longer willing to prosecute this case, so I ask that this matter be dismissed. And then the judge, since the government no longer wants to prosecute the case, right? The government dismisses the case. There's no longer a court case which is actually protecting that migrant who's seeking protection in court. Migrant walks out and is being detained. This is happening all over the country. Again, you're not fixing the issue, you're exacerbating the problem. There's a judge called Judge Pappas. If you Google him, P-A-P-P-A-S, he was a judge in Chelmsford. The prior administration opened the 2nd immigration court in Massachusetts to deal with the volume. They hired 12 judges, 12 new immigration judges for that court. They trained those people. They staffed that court. All of those judges, but 2 right now, have been fired by the current administration. Because as Judge Pappas, who was just let go, I actually had my last day in court, his last day in court, I had a hearing with him. And you can see that he was just like, he knew it was coming. He was just trying to get stuff out of the way, right? He was moving things quickly. He gets fired, and he's been very vocal about the fact that they were basically pushing him to dismiss these cases. They were pushing him to make the decisions in accordance to what the administration wanted him to do. And he was refusing to do that. So I mean, when you have a judge being pushed to rule one way or another, that should send shivers down your spine. Think about that. They're attacking the legal immigration system in other ways too. One of the first things the administration said was, we're going to put on pause for about a year all green card adjudications that are based on asylum for security reasons. We're going to look into them a little more. Okay? So for security reasons, if you applied for asylum and got granted and your green card is being processed, we're going to put a hold onto that. They just came out with a memo about 3 weeks ago. U-Visa is a defense, is a way to get status by helping law enforcement. So if you're a victim of a crime and you had no status and you assist law enforcement, the law basically says that the government will offer you some protection so that you're not afraid of being deported, so you can actually cooperate with authorities. So they put out a memo about 3 weeks ago saying that the U-Visa, the U-Visa system is filled with fraud. I've been doing U-Visas for over a decade. Never once I came across a fraudulent case. But what are they doing? They are setting the stage to be able to challenge these approvals later on. They're doing the same thing with juvenile status, which is a protection for minors who suffered abandonment and abuse from their parents. So if a child is here in Massachusetts and they don't have either parent here, so they can seek lawful status based on if they can show the family court that they suffered abandonment, abuse, or neglect. And of course, it's a long process. It's not as simple as I'm saying. But they're also saying the same thing. There was another memo saying that that category is riddled with fraud and that there are a lot of gang members getting status through that category. They are discussing reworking the H-1B visa lottery and even ending the program. What is the H-1B? It's a specialty visa that brings people with special skills to the United States. So they're not attacking unauthorized migration, they're attacking our legal immigration system itself. On June 11th, there was a DOJ memo recommending that the government pursues denaturalization of citizens at full force if they suspect that they engaged in fraud or criminal activity or whatnot. Basically what they're saying is, even you, naturalized citizen, are not safe. And it's creating fear and panic. So I have people who have been citizens for 20, 30 years calling the office and saying, what do I do? Because they are now afraid that the government would pursue denaturalization against them. We're only 7 months in, guys. And of course, one of the first things the government did was an executive order to end birthright citizenship. What's birthright citizenship? 14th Amendment of the Constitution, right? Basically grants a person that was born in the United States and under its jurisdiction, meaning subject to its laws, citizenship at birth. That was a Civil War amendment, and we're going to talk a little bit more about it when we do the historical timeline. But what that amendment basically does is it grants somebody who's born here, whether their parents are lawfully here and documented or undocumented, citizenship at birth. That's the choice we made when we enacted the 14th Amendment. Now, some people may disagree. They may say, well, that's not how it was supposed to be. And those debates were played out in 1868 when the amendment was ratified. Oh, but if we do this, we're going to extend citizenship to the children of Chinese migrants, which weren't a class that were, and people didn't like Chinese, right? There was the Chinese Exclusion Act. There was a lot of discrimination against Asian people there, as still there is some now. So those debates went on, and the 14th Amendment was ratified, and the 14th Amendment does exactly that. It provides citizenship at birth. The administration issued an executive order, day one, saying that unless you can show that one of your parents had legal status in the United States, well, not only legal status, but legal permanent status, the child is no longer a U.S. citizen. What this does, right, is even if somebody is here on a student visa, well, let's say the prior presidential candidate, Kamala Harris, her parents were here on a student visa. Right? So she wouldn't have been a citizen at birth. If your parents are here on an H-1B visa, and people sometimes stay here on an H-1B visa for 10 years, sometimes children are born here, they grow up in the United States, those children, according to the executive order, are no longer considered citizens. This creates issues for you guys too, because every time you go and get a passport, you're going to have to show that your parents were actually either legal permanent residents or citizens. I mean, we're not even thinking about the consequences of how this plays out for those of you who never even thought about immigration in your lives, and you simply go to the post office today to ask for a passport. Luckily, several courts have enjoined this. It went all the way up to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court, instead of tackling the issue, they decided they were going to talk about national injunctions. So they didn't really, they punted on the issue, sent it back to the lower courts, but the lower court said, you know what, we still think it's unlawful. And we still think a national injunction here is warranted because, I mean, if in Massachusetts, a child born of a parent who has no status as a citizen, but in Florida that child is not, how do you enforce that across 50 states? That's crazy, right? So the courts have, despite the non-decision of the Supreme Court, the federal courts at the lower level have decided that, yeah, that the national injunction is still warranted here. And for now, this is enjoined. I mean, the Supreme Court has tackled this issue before. In fact, there was a case from a child of Chinese nationals who were here at the time, Kim Woo-mark, that left, and then when he was coming back in, they didn't want to let him in because they said, well, you're not a citizen. And the Supreme Court at that time, don't quote me on this, 1860s, 70s, said, no, he is a citizen, he should come in. And that's why, I ask you guys to think about whether this is really about controlling unauthorized migration, or whether it's about, like I said in the beginning, and I truly believe this, social engineering, and really trying to figure out what the makeup of the United States should be in the future. What should the United States look like? And it's, sorry, no, it's okay. What was the comment? Billionaires. Well, I mean, if we're all billionaires, I mean, it would be a fun world, but it doesn't work like that, right? And I use a lot of Twitter. They don't call it Twitter these days, they call it X. But I always see, comments like this, like Charlie Kirk is a very conservative commentator. It's time to dramatically reduce legal immigration. So they're already on the next argument. Okay, yeah, we're going to reduce illegal immigration, but now they're talking about legal immigration. Laura Loomer, also a reporter, a conservative reporter. Alligator Lives Matter. There's a new detention center in Florida, built to house 5,000 people in an old airport next to the Everglades, called Alligator Alcatraz, right? The good news is alligators are guaranteed at least 65 million meals if we get started now. 65 million, by the way, is the population of Latinos in the United States. Not unauthorized migrants, Latinos. This is the new propaganda that is coming from ICE, now that they have all the money that came with the the Big Beautiful Bill, right? And they're investing a lot in hiring ICE officers. Help your country and yourself. Report all foreign invaders. That's the language that's being used. This is a real poster. Homeland Security, guys. Yep. America needs you. $50,000 signing bonus. That's a sweet deal. You do not need an undergraduate degree. This one is scary. Again, DHS. This is your official Twitter account. Serve your country, defend your culture. What does that mean? This is scary stuff. Defend your culture. So again, I think it goes beyond, right? Let's fix unauthorized migration. Let's fix the border. The border was chaotic. There was chaos there, for sure. I think we could all see that. And again, this hasn't happened only the last 5 years. This has been an issue for decades, right? We need to fix our system, absolutely. But I don't think that's it. I don't think that's what's happening right now.
Could you just read what's underneath there? America needs you and what's underneath the
Yeah, America has been invaded by criminals and predators. We need you to get them out. You do not need an undergraduate degree. You may be entitled to up to these benefits: $50,000 signing bonus, $60,000 student loan repayment, and 25% premium pay. Choose your mission. That's our government speaking on our behalf.
There's no data to back up that statement about criminals.
There's no data, and we're going to talk about some of these numbers in a little bit. But, and I mean, look, you want to talk about criminals? No status for over 20 years. Never a criminal charge in my life. Never used a fake document. Always paid my taxes. Raised my kids. What criminals are we talking about? You know, who are these predators the administration is talking about? I told you that this is an issue that's been with us forever, and I do think that immigration has been tied to race relations for a while in our country. Okay, and it's important that we recognize that as an issue. Not because we're a bad country. No, I think we're an amazing country full of possibilities. I love the United States of America. I am incredibly proud of being an American, right? But no country is perfect, and neither are we. And we have things that we could certainly improve on, and things that certainly have improved over the years. But when we've had our first immigration statute in 1790, free white persons who resided at least 2 years in the United States could apply for naturalization. Okay, so you had to be a free white person. Not unusual for the time, right? 1868, 14th Amendment is ratified. And I think this is interesting. Why do I put the 14th Amendment here? Of course, it's not an immigration bill, right? People are like, well, the 14th Amendment was meant to cure Dred Scott, which some of you may know was a Supreme Court decision that basically said that black people were not real people. They were just chatter, they're things, right? Chattel. And then the 14th Amendment came back, was ratified and said, no, they are citizens of the United States. They have rights like everybody else. But again, during the ratification of the 14th Amendment, there were discussions about, well, what does that do to, non-citizens and the children of non-citizens who are here? Well, they're going to become citizens too. And if you look at the timeline, there was not much happening until then. But as soon as that happens, we have the Chinese Exclusion Act and the first attempt to regulate migration. Some people aren't happy with the 14th Amendment. And suddenly the rule that you needed to be a free white person to become a citizen was thrown out of the window because if you are an Asian national or a Chinese national and you're living in the United States and you had a child in here, that child would become a US citizen. Oops, some people didn't want that. So there are actually 3 separate statutes over the course of 15 years related to excluding Chinese and people of Asian descent, okay? So, and that started in 1882. It went on all the way up to 1917. And immigration became more restrictive as we progressed through the 20th century. In the 1940s, we had some good development. Chinese immigrants actually gained eligibility to become citizens, which was great, right? Filipinos did too. And the Bracero program was created. What was the Bracero program? Some of you may know about this, but Mexican nationals used to basically walk back and forth across the border. There was not really a border problem because there was a big need for labor in the Southwest. And Mexican migrants would fill that need by walking in, and spending a few months here and then going back home whenever they're, right? There was no more need for their labor. So in 1940s, what happens is we have obviously World War II, right? The world is changing. And there's a shortage of employment in the United States. So we said, okay, let's regulate the flow of traffic of Mexican nationals. So in response to that, the Bracero program was created, which basically was an employer had to make sure that they were responsible for that, for the labor force that they were bringing, responsible for making sure they returned. And that lasted until about 65, when we had a big Immigration Reform Act. Before that, 1952, why do I put that down there? This act created for the first time what is called the family preference category, which classified the people who could immigrate through a family member, but it also removed, for the first time, the free white person's requirement. So for the first time in our history, 160 years later, you didn't actually need to be a white man or woman to become a US citizen. There are several stories. I didn't do those cases. I'm not, I wasn't here then. But there are several stories about how this happened a lot with Italian families. Some of them, like in my family, some of us are darker, right? Some of us are very blonde with blue eyes or green eyes. And that happens a lot in Italian families. And there are several stories about siblings who were allowed to become citizens because of the way they look, right? And others were not because they were of a darker hue. Well, that in 1952 they get rid of that, which is great. Again, those are positive developments. And in 1965, they basically end the system that allowed people to come in here based on race. Up until then, 80% of the immigrants coming here were Europeans, right? So that's when really diversity gets brought into our immigration system. Some people love that, some others don't. But that also created a quota system, and really our immigration issues start in 1965. That's when immigration became illegal, okay? That's when status, in a way, if you didn't fit within certain boxes and certain limits created by the law, you now were considered to be unlawful in the country. So really our problems stem from 1965, if I can point to a specific statute. Again, it's historical, right? None of this develops from one day to another. But that's really, I think, it was a bill that they tried to do something really good with it and ended up creating many issues. In '86, Reagan comes in, does a big amnesty, gets 2.7 million people who had no status into light and into status, and they thought, okay, this has got to solve it. But again, 1996, they were dealing with it again, and then Clinton comes in and passes a draconian bill called we call it IRIRA, and the immigration law becomes as restrictive as it can be. And I think this really compounds the issues of the 1965 law, because they thought, okay, if we go really strong on enforcement, if we create all of these penalties in the law, if we create a permanent bar which doesn't allow you to ever get status again, if we require people to go back for 10 years before they can get a green card, if we do all of that, if we create the expedited removal proceedings, which the current administration is using to deport people without due process, if we do all of that, we're going to end unauthorized migration forever. Well, we didn't. All it did was to create the issues that we have with 11 million people in our country, who, once they fall out of status, very rarely they can go back into status. So when people say, why don't people go to the back of the line? When people say, why don't they go to the back of the line and wait? I always tell them, which line? Which line are you talking about? Because for a lot of people, there's no line. And if there is a line, sometimes it will take 30 years for you to get through that line. You may be dead by then. I frequently have to answer these questions. You know, you have sometimes, yesterday, I think it was yesterday, I did a consultation. Mother's applying for a child. She's 75 years old. Her case is going to take 12 years to get through the system. And then the daughter looks at me and is like, okay, what if my mother passes during this time? That's it. And it's a possibility, right? Now, willing, she will live another 12 years, but we don't know. Just to give you an idea of how long some of these timelines are, these are different family preference categories. They were created in 1965. F1 is a family preference category for an adult son or daughter of a US citizen. So let's say that you have a son or daughter that was born overseas, and he or she is older than 21 years old. And you apply for them today. They are processing cases from June 2016. So that's for your son and daughter, the son and daughter of a US citizen. That's 9 years. If they're from Mexico, because we have quotas, not only a total number of migrants that we admit every year, but we also have specific country quotas. And these countries here are oversubscribed, meaning there's a lot of them in a queue. Okay? So if you're from Mexico, same situation. You're the parent of an adult son or daughter, and you apply for them. The priority date right now is in 2005, meaning 20 years. F4, I once had a case in this category. This is a sibling category, if you're the sibling of a US citizen. She was a Mexican national. Her mother, father, and disabled sibling lived in Mexico. He was 25, 26 years old at the time. Mother passes. She was here, she was a US citizen. She comes to us and she says, I want to bring my dad here because he's alone without mom. I want to be able to take care of him. But I also need to bring in my brother because my brother is fully dependent on my father. Well, we could bring the father because that petition is called a primary relative, an immediate relative. It doesn't have a quota. So that's an immediate petition. But when we discussed bringing her sibling in, look at this, 24 years wait. And she's like, but what am I going to do with my brother for 24 years? Where is he going to stay? I said, well, he has to stay back home. But he's not self-sufficient. He's disabled. So these are the quandaries that our immigration system. Now, you would think, right, that there would be a humanitarian visa to say, you know what, this child, even though he's an adult child, is totally 100% dependent on the father's care, that you would allow that child to migrate. Not the case. The child is actually living in the United States today unauthorized. They brought him in at one point. So our system ends up creating the very illegality that we say we want to combat.
Excuse me, could I just ask a question?
Yes.
Those dates that you had, so
Yeah.
that person, the disabled person, has been waiting since 2001
Yeah,
to come to this company.
yeah.
So apparently they didn't go to you first, so they just came to you later and try and talk about it?
No, they came to me before, and I said that there's nothing I can do to bring your sibling in right now.
Oh,
I mean, I can put the petition now, but it's going to take 24 years before you can get your sibling here.
What he said, I think what he's saying, those dates are, the courts are working right now on dealing with cases.
On those cases, right.
So it's taken, the only cases right now are already 25 years old.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you have a case now, it's going to take another 20
Exactly.
years.
Yeah.
That's if they even keep enough judges to
Yeah.
maintain this.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. That's exactly it. This is not a court system, by the way. This is a system that is immigration in general because, again, quotas, right? Just so you know. But that's exactly it. So today, and this is the current visa bulletin, these are the cases that are being worked on right now. So again, when that person comes to me and they're like, I want to bring my family in here, I'm like, okay, I can bring your father, but we don't really have a solution for your brother right now. You can apply, but again, it's going to be 20 years, 24 years before they get here. Estimate, right? Because these numbers, they vary. Sometimes they speed up a little bit. Most often, they actually get delayed. I mean, these numbers, I've been seeing them just get, the delay get longer and longer as we go. So, and more. Person comes in now, they're living unauthorized in the United States, and now the 1996 law says that they have a 10-year bar. So before they get that green card, once that visa becomes current 24 years from now, they have to leave and spend 10 years out before they come back in. Now we're talking 34 years. And then people are like, get to the back of the line. This is the line. This is your line. We actually had a decrease in the number of unauthorized migrants in the United States, just so you know. But from this slide here, what I want to call your attention is to again, right, we talked about the predators and the criminals, and who are these people? Where are these people? About 4.4 million US-born children under 18 live with an unauthorized immigrant parent. Think about that. 4.4 million US-born children live with a parent that has no immigration status. This is how crazy this is. Most of what we have today are mixed status families. Are families that, like mine, right? My mother was a citizen, my siblings were born here. And I grew up in a family without status, a mixed status family. There's one or two people that may not have status. And what are some of the myths? Immigrants don't pay taxes. We hear that all the time. Have you guys ever heard of an individual taxpayer identification number? It's called ITIN for short. Okay. The government came up with a number. The government came up with a number to say, okay, you don't have a Social Security, that's fine, no problem. I'm going to give you a number so that you can file your tax returns. Okay? And in fact, the administration now has fired countless IRS officials because they are pressuring the IRS to disclose from all those people who've been filing taxes all of those years who has status and who doesn't. Certainly not criminals paying taxes. $96 billion in taxes in 2022. Plus, they pay property taxes. They pay, they go in and they buy a car. They're going to pay an auto. They buy gas, right? People are moving the economy. Those numbers are not here. Because the myth is people are really taking our services, right? And they are using our resources. But immigrants contribute a lot more to our country, unauthorized migrants, than we know. In fact, I don't think we have that number. I didn't see that on the PowerPoint, and I don't know if you have it, Thales, but we had the number of contributions to Social Security. If you can, see if we can pull that up. Because right now, we all know that Social Security is, right, it's insolvent. That at some point, we're going to run out of money. In fact, there's a pile of money in Social Security right now that is sitting there that is coming from unauthorized workers that they're never going to be able to access because they cannot get Social Security benefits. So it's actually keeping the system solvent. It's crazy, but it is. And these are the top 6 states that are raising tax revenue for undocumented workers. Not a myth. If we get rid of everybody, we're going to have more work for everybody. Guys, immigrants, they consume as they are here, right? Whether they are authorized or not. They generate labor. I founded my law firm, and all my employees were American citizens. And before I became a citizen myself, they all worked for me. And like that, I had tons of clients. I have a client bring me his tax returns the other day. He has this huge landscaping company. Has over 50 people working for him. He generated $4 million last year. He has no status. He's been in this country for almost 30 years. Hard worker.
Has a tax ID number.
Has a tax ID number. Government takes his tax money every year. What are we doing to ourselves? Why am I not going to tell this person, say, you know what? Let me actually give you status. And these are some of the industries that would really be impacted. Construction, childcare, leisure. Obviously, construction industry relies a lot in unauthorized labor. Healthcare. The problem with healthcare, there's a lot of CNAs. There's a lot of CNAs that are unauthorized worker. When you go into hospitals, there's something called E-Verify and employment verification, which are tools that were put in place in 1986 for employers to actually verify people's status. So there's not a lot of immigrant workers there because when they come in, employers have to go through a checklist and check to see if they have certain documents before.
Is that for nursing homes and any kind of healthcare or just hospitals?
That is the law for every single employer in the United States, just to be honest, The thing is, some industries do this better than others because they have a lot to lose, right? So if you work for the banking industry, if you work for the healthcare industry, depending on whether you work for and again, right, there's a lot of CNAs, there are a lot of nursing homes that don't do as good a job of employment verification, or sometimes look the other way because they can't find the workers, right? I've had employers tell me many times, I don't care. I'm like, well, this is what the law is. As your lawyer, I have to advise you what your obligation is. And I can't find the workers. you know? So, but when you get into hospitals, not as much, but certainly there's a lot of CNAs that have no status. Now this one I love because a lot of people say, well, if you violated your status, you're a criminal. Immigration violations are actually civil in nature. They're civil violations, they're not criminal violations. Overstaying a visa, crossing the border is actually not a civil violation. And it's, sorry,
Yeah, criminal or not civil?
civil violation. It's a civil violation, not criminal. Sorry, maybe I misspoke. Not criminal. I like to say it's the same as a parking violation. You park your car, you didn't put money on that meter, and bang, there you are. And now you have to leave the United States for 10 years and you can never come back again before you can park your car on Main Street. That's basically what we're doing.
I have a question at the other side. When these employers say, I didn't do whatever I'm supposed to do and I hired them, is there any penalty if the government finds out that the employer has hired an illegal person?
So here's the thing, right? And here's part of the hypocrisy in our system. We're criminalizing, marginalizing all of these people who are working and paying taxes, and we're saying they are the problem. What are we doing with the employers? How many times do you hear on the news that so-and-so from such and such corporation was arrested because they were hiring an unauthorized workforce? Rarely, right? Rarely. So that's part of the hypocrisy, right? Wouldn't it be easier to solve it that way? To actually switch enforcement towards that? And again, who are these criminals? It's just like, I love this guy, José Antonio Vargas. When I was in law school, he was a Washington Post journalist for many years. And when I was in law school, he wrote a piece in the New York Times, basically he was here for 35 years, and he basically disclosed, listen, I don't have any status. And it's a beautiful piece. You should go and read it. I had the pleasure to meet him a few years ago when he came to the Harvard School of Government to give a talk. And every once in a while we chat online, but he does a beautiful advocacy work. And again, no status. Won a Pulitzer Prize for, trying to remember what the story was, there was a school shooting back in Maryland, I think. I can't remember, but he won a Pulitzer Prize for covering that. Salma Hayek, some of you may know her. Neil Young lived without status in the United States. The Black Panther, Julissa, who was the former Goldman Sachs VP. This guy's in Congress right now. He never said he wasn't documented, but he's given some interviews saying that he's earned some prize money when he didn't quite have the status to actually work lawfully. Same with this guy here, who, when he was a student, was also doing work. Students are not authorized to work in the United States, by the way. Okay, that's a violation of your immigration status, which makes you unlawful immediately. I love this story here. This guy here, I love this story. He was 19 years old. He crossed the border, worked in the fields for a few years, decided that he was gonna, invest in his schooling, went to Harvard, became one of the leading neurosurgeons in the world, Dr. Q, down in Maryland. I love that story. It inspired me. I'm like, if that guy can do it, I can become a lawyer. And there are so many examples of those. And Thales was facetious and he put a picture of me here.
Another notable.
Why should we be concerned, guys? Let me see how we're doing with time, because I do want to make sure that we leave ample time for questions. Yeah. Huh? People talk about her. I don't know. I mean, I never seen an interview or anything that would say, yeah, here it is. This,
They
yeah.
called it, what do they call the Einstein?
The Einstein visa,
so
yeah.
It's all,
Yeah. The Einstein visa is the, well,
but there was no.
so here's the thing. So here's,
There was no Einstein, you know, that's right.
no, I hear you, but I will tell you this in defense of Melania Trump. The EB1, which is what's called the Einstein visa, you can get that. You don't need to be necessarily an Einstein to get that. You can have a special skill that you're really incredibly good at. I wasn't. Hey, listen. I wasn't an immigration lawyer. I will tell you that, you know, like the Einstein visa. Leonardo Messi, for those of you who like soccer, right? He came in from Argentina. He's now in Miami. He got an EB1. Okay, he has that special talent. If you win an Oscar, you get the Einstein visa. You know, maybe you're just, you know, maybe you're a great actor, but not necessarily incredibly smart. So in her defense, right? I don't know. I'm not sure exactly what she argued was her special skill. We're not going to go into that, but so I don't know. I don't know about Melania Trump, but people do talk. I know that some of it is also political, right? And again, I promised right away that I was going to stay away from politics. Why this should concern you guys? 1/3 of FBI's agents should be investing their time in immigration enforcement. The FBI, when we bombed Iran a few weeks ago, they actually said, "Oh my gosh, we got all those agents working on immigration. Let's shift them, some of them back to counterterrorism because we may have an issue after these bombings." That should concern you. 80% of the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms agency is doing immigration enforcement work now. HSI, which is a section of DHS, Homeland Security Investigation, amazing agents, by the way. I've met some of them, incredibly bright people, doing immigration enforcement, arresting mothers and fathers, people without criminal records. Students, yeah. Students. So what does that do to our security? What about the other issues? The DEA has officers that had been reassigned. The IRS has officers that have been reassigned to immigration. What about everything else? What about, you know, we're talking about drugs coming across the border, right? We talk about that all the time, that we don't want that, fentanyl. I mean, who's taking care of that if people are out in the communities arresting people who are working construction sites and in fact, this is a chart that shows that some of these issues have received less attention recently. Narcotics, drugs, white-collar crime, civil rights, while of course immigration enforcement is up. So that's problematic for us as a country. Why should we be concerned? Because right now, we arrest people based on what they look like. And there's a quota that they need to meet, which is 3,000 people a day. Last week, this huge vehicle opened up its back doors in front of a Home Depot, and all these ICE officers walked out of it. About a month ago, which is what sparked the protests in California, people went into a Home Depot and started detaining people based on what they looked like. There are actually clients inside a Home Depot store. What kind of country is this? It's not the one I grew up in. And I end with that question, right? Why are agents wearing masks? Now the administration is saying, well, it's to protect them and their families. Listen, law enforcement, I've never seen a police officer wearing a mask ever. They do difficult work. I'm sure that there are some people who want to hurt them, but they wear their badges. They will identify themselves. Why do we have masked agents walking in, sometimes into private properties and private businesses, without identifying themselves and blocking people out of their environment? And why are we okay with that? I appreciate that. Right? So, again, that's scary.
We're watching breaking news as it unfolds. A widespread immigration raids. ICE agents in a neighborhood like this. Is this normal? Can something like this happen in
A boy left by himself on a walk-down sidewalk after ICE agents take away the adult with him. Makes him
I'm coming to Boston. Come with me.
processed and detained. An ICE spokesperson tells WJ's.
Showing the moment ICE agents smashed a car window and forcibly removed his man in Bedford. 29-year-old Juan Francisco Mendez has no criminal record.
Children in zip ties at immigration court in San Antonio today.
So now we're putting zip ties on kids. This is the image of 3 children taken into custody and restrained.
right now, people are being taken, and if they cannot be sent to their countries of origin, they are sent to third countries. The government, 2 months ago, removed 250 Venezuelans despite a federal court ordering them not to. Here in Boston, we're constantly filing habeas, and the federal court is saying, do not move that person out of Massachusetts. And ICE is like, well, I didn't see the ruling. And then they will move. You mentioned the student. That's what happened to Rumesa. A habeas corpus was filed, asking her to be kept here, and she was sent out. Why? I just told you that they fired over 10 judges at Chelmsford Immigration Court. Why? Because here in Boston, in a way, we were very lucky to have judges who actually ruled based on the law, right? In some other places, we may not be that lucky, right? We may not be that lucky. So, ICE officers, as you saw, are breaking through windows. That client is actually the client of a former professor of mine in law school. And that day, she was texting a group of attorneys, of immigration attorneys, and she was desperate. She's like, this was in the very beginning, and we're all like still trying to readapt and understand what was coming our way. It's like, I don't know what's going on, but the officer's threatening that he's going to break the car window. And I am on the phone saying, I am on my way there to talk to you. And she's texting, what else should I do? That was that scene over there. This is happening daily. When they promised that they were going to bring hell to Boston, they did. It was a whole month where it was just crazy. People detained left and right. ICE was actually stopping in cities with high immigrant populations like Milford or Framingham. And as they saw a construction van come by, they would stop the van and detain everybody inside. If you looked brown and you were driving a construction vehicle, I saw you, they would just stop you and take you with them. So again, why it's important that we know that? Because we need to understand that while no group of people is perfect, there are, absolutely. You're going to say, oh, but that unauthorized migrant in whatever state, he killed that person. Yes, of course. There are people who are bad people. You don't necessarily need to be authorized or unauthorized, an American citizen or not, to be a bad person. There's always going to be, right, a bad apple. Always. But you cannot use that as an excuse now to generalize, and it's what the administration is doing, and they do it really well. And again, try not to be political, right? But this is what they do really well. They just did that with DC today. They put the National Guard in charge of the local police. Why? Because DC is in chaos. Because it's a violent city. It has its problems. We'll all admit that, right? Boston has its problems. But you don't.
They also have a 30-year low crime rate.
Yes, it's actually the crime rate has been dropping for the last 2 years, right? So why now put the National Guard in charge of the local police? The same way that the National Guard was put in California whenever the raids were going on.
So that 3-day bench trial that's going on in California, where Governor Newsom sued because he said that they didn't have the authority to come in and, put the Marines and take over the National Guard without his permission. Will that have any impact on what's going on in Washington now? Because President Trump doesn't really have.
Yeah, in Washington, my understanding, and the news just broke this afternoon, so I haven't been able to look into this, but my understanding is that there is a federal statute that gives the government certain powers as in respect to policing, which would make sense, right? As a district. Right. It's a federal district, right? So there may be something. In fact, I know that there is, that they don't necessarily need to to ask for the permission of the governor, like in California, to put the National Guard, to deploy the National Guard. I just don't know exactly what the statute is. I have to look into this, but there's certainly a difference in regards to DC. But I don't know that this, like what happened in California about a month ago or so, that these are not test cases. I don't know.
He did say that he was going out to New York.
He was naming Democratic cities that he's with.
Yeah.
There's much power.
And even what happened in Washington, it's supposed to be the House of Representatives that has home rule. There was a law that got changed to give DC some home rule, but it's only supposed. It's still illegal the way. I mean, not the way it is.
I don't doubt you. I don't doubt you. I just don't want to pass judgment based on something that I don't have the full information on. But I don't doubt you. Because I remember when January 6th happened that they were looking for authorization from the House. Yeah. So I remember that much. But again, right, I think what happens, when I was, right before this, Liz and I were talking, and I'm like, this is the canary in a coal mine, right? What is this? Is this a sign of other things to come? And I think that that's where we, as citizens, as concerned citizens, and I mean citizens in a very broad way, should really be advocating and making sure that we're making our voices heard, because honestly, if you're disregarding a judicial order with respect to the removal of 250 people, what's to say that you're not going to disregard the next judicial order whenever it's convenient for you? And I always say, irrespective of where you land in a political spectrum, you cannot shut off or on the Constitution just to suit your needs, right? You can't, whether you like it or not, right? We're supposed to work by the same rules, and right now, we're not. We're creating these massive detention centers across the country. We just created one in Florida, and now we're building another one in Indiana to detain people. The BBB bill has assigned $40 billion towards detention centers. What are they going to do with all that money? Where are they putting in these detention centers? What is the ultimate goal with this? And you may not know this, but you could definitely, I mean, as a lawyer, when a client of mine is detained, they can even have a legal pathway to status, but they may say, you know what, I'm not going to wait for that 6 months here while detained. I can't. And they may ask, just let me go. And I've had those situations, right?
Question, there's, they have this ad saying to self-deport, and they put out this huge number of people that are self-deporting, which I don't see. Do you have any idea of the numbers of immigrants who are self-deporting?
I don't have statistics about the number of people who are self-deporting, but I will tell you, in my practice, I've had this conversation many times over the last few months. And I've had people who told me, I just want to leave. I can't do it anymore.
I've had too, but also,
Yeah.
they put out this huge number, the government said, what's her face, Bobby, whatever, who was talking about
Yeah.
how we have left, and like,
Yeah, I don't know what their numbers are, but again, I do think that a lot of people are just going to give up. One of my colleagues, one of the attorneys in my office, she has this friend who they grew up together, they went to school together, high school together, and she's a DACA holder. A DACA is a protection for people who came here under 15 before 2007, was done through executive order by Obama. So she grew up here. She came here, she was 2 years old. Okay? And she just told me yesterday, she said, do you remember so-and-so? She's leaving. I'm like, leaving where? She said, oh, she's going back. She said, they're going to sell their house here, buy a house overseas, and they just don't want to go through this anymore.
just going back, do you have any numbers on the fact that they are paying them to leave? Because they're saying,
I haven't heard of anybody who got the $1,000 yet. But in theory, there's this app where you register and you take a picture of yourself, and then you tell the government when you're leaving, and then once you leave, you get paid $1,000, right?
Yeah.
I haven't heard of anybody who got the $1,000 yet. So And of course, right, they create this sense of fear because that's exactly what they're expecting, that people will just say, I'm not going to deal with this for another 3 years and a half. Yeah.
So, so many agricultural workers had those special visas that they would come, you know, and help harvest the food,
Yes.
plant or whatever. And then now they're leaving because they had ICE agents running through tomato fields after them.
Yep.
So, that's the narcissistic sociopath that sits in the White House. Oh, Trump. Did that stop over there? So he gave an exemption to farm and agricultural workers. How is that still playing out?
Yeah, he didn't really. So what happened was, yeah, he didn't really. So what happened was they got a lot of pushback politically from probably a lot of the, right? Right, farm owners, right? That, you know, called and said, listen, this is not why I voted for you, and, you know. And then they said, well, we should create an exemption for agricultural workers and workers in the hotel industry. And I can't remember, maybe it was construction industry. I can't remember what the other industry was. But in fact, Stephen Miller, who's really the author, right, of immigration policy, yeah, he immediately went back and said, no, we're actually not doing that. So no. So there is no actual exemption, which, by the way, you raise an important point. A lot of the agricultural workers are here on H-2 visas, which is a temporary farm work visa. But today, it doesn't really matter whether you're applying for status or not. They're not asking those questions. In fact, there are several U.S. citizens who have been detained and later released because they figured out that they were U.S. citizens. So even people who are in some kind of a process to get legal status have been detained. And we get those stories all the time. In fact, I had a conversation with a client today. A client said to me, you know, but if we start this process, you know, can you guarantee that I'm not going to be detained? I said, no, I can't. And she's like, but what's the point then? Why am I gonna step forward if you're telling me that you cannot guarantee that I won't get detained?
So when you start this process, and then they get a court date, maybe 2 years down the road, and how do you know if that public prosecutor is going to ask to dismiss? Do you have an idea, or are they just all told to? Right
now. So. Legal strategy, recordings, you know. So, I mean, there's an assumption right now that they're going to be asking cases to be dismissed.
And then they walk out
and then once they walk out, they're, yeah.
And if the court clerk says go out the back door, then the court clerk is also.
Right, because we had that case also, right? That was in criminal court. There's no back door in immigration court, just so you know.
So do they understand the Nazis? Do they understand that?
I think, you
I'm
know.
not political, but I am one.
No, and you guys can be as political as you want, and I appreciate that.
Right.
And so here's the thing, right? You know, I didn't live through World War II, right? And you grow up reading these stories, and you're always asking yourself, how did it get to this point?
All the time.
Yeah. How did it ever get to this point? Right. And when we're looking at what we're living through, right, and the little things that are happening little by little, right, the exclusion of a specific group of people, and yeah, the law can apply differently to them because, of course, they're different than us, right? They don't have legal status, so the law says that they're illegal, right? And then the National Guard takes over the police of a city, right? So things like that. And honestly, even though people are talking about it, we haven't really seen any movement like opposing this. And in fact, I think the opposition, the political opposition today, is, you see a lot less protest than you saw on the first term. And what's going on today is a lot more radical than what was going on in the first term, right? So I don't know where the political pushback is. And I am afraid that a lot of people are simply saying, you know what, this is okay with me. Yeah. Without really knowing that by continuing on this path, we may get to a place where we don't want to be. I was actually I had the privilege to be in Rome last week. 4 days. That's how much time I got. But it was a lovely city, and I toured the Jewish ghetto in Rome and went into the Jewish museum. And there was a plaque there that said that the Jewish community actually welcomed some of the changes that the Italian fascist, what's his name? Mussolini. That Mussolini was implementing in the beginning because they thought it was going to benefit them. Yeah, before they put them on the ghetto. So I think a lot of people do not realize. I will tell you, I know a lot of immigrants who actually have supported the government and these policies. It's crazy to think about that.
In bringing up the comparison to the World War II era, and in particular, like bringing up Mussolini, if anyone has seen the PBS specials by Rick Steves, and he actually produced them, I think, 5 or 6 years ago. There's about an hour-and-a-half version called Fascism in Europe, and it's about Mussolini and Hitler. And he tours those two countries. He interviews tour guides who are very honest about how their feelings about their country in the past. And the comparison to what's happening in this country now is eerie. And there's actually a shorter version, it's about a half an hour, just about fascism in Germany. And if you haven't seen it yet, I would Google it and watch it. I think it's, have you seen it?
I haven't, no. And I love Rick Stevens, but I didn't know about that documentary.
I urge you to watch
yeah.
it, and I would say, and I want to give you a compliment. I really think that many immigrants, no matter where they're from, have much in common. Immigrants to the United States, who, whether it's fighting for status, fleeing persecution, but the love of this country is something they have in common. And then integrating into this country is not easy. My parents were immigrants. And whenever whether I read it in a book or I hear someone say it, as soon as I hear someone say something that my parents taught me, I give them an A+. I know I'm biased, but earlier you mentioned, well, this country isn't perfect. I can picture my father in front of the television watching maybe a certain news program, something happened in this country, and he'd turn to me and say, the country isn't perfect, but it's still the best country in the world. And they never stop being grateful for being in this country. But I can picture, as you just said, this isn't the country they came to. The country we're in right now isn't the country they came to, and I fear for it.
Thank you.
Keep doing what you're doing and bringing attention to these issues that maybe many people aren't aware to the depth that you're showing them. Because my parents came from displaced persons camps in Germany after World War II. They understood what happened in Europe. And like I said, they never stop being grateful to live in this country. And to make you smile a little bit, my father called me the Yankee Doodle of the family.
Thank you for your beautiful words.
Just a question I have.
Yes, by all means.
Getting back to the timeline, what answer can you give a person who say, grandparents or whatever, emigrated at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, that period, well before 1940. Well, my parents came legally. So let these people,
Yeah.
So how do you answer that? Because I know that it's just not that simple. Like, well,
Yeah, it's not.
ABC, and here they are.
Yeah, we get a lot of that, right? It's like the people here don't do it the same way, and my parents came in lawfully. I mean, if you look at the history of immigration and the history of the statutes, immigration, it was a lot easier to come in way back when, right? And then the 40s than it is right now. In fact, I will tell you today, I looked at a green card petition from 1968, I think, and it was 2 pages long. My green card petition today is about 200 pages. So, again, very different standards, right? So definitely, yeah, they did it the right way. Of course they did it the right way. Because there were really no restrictions, or the restrictions were not as stringent as today's. Do you have a follow-up to that?
Yeah, so you can't, it's apples and oranges, you can't possibly.
You cannot possibly compare. And one more thing, because I think that's, and I think my last slide speaks to that. Another thing that people say all the time is like, do you not understand what part of illegal don't you understand? All the time I get that when I'm doing these talks. You know, they're illegal immigrants. What part of illegal don't you understand? And I use the analogy, right? You parked on Main Street, you didn't put a coin on the meter, and now you're banned for parking there for another 10 years, right? Crazy stuff. I mean, immigration is a civil violation. You go in, the government can basically detain you forever without giving you a bond if you cross the border. It's crazy to think about that people can lose their right to liberty, which we value so much in this country, based on a civil violation. But also, what is lawful and what is lawful? Do we really have a moral? I go back to Martin Luther King, right? And the letter that he wrote. What is moral and what is not? What is just and what is not? You have laws. Would you say, what part of illegal don't you understand to justify women who are not given the right to vote? Would you say, what part of illegal don't you understand to justify slavery in 1850? Or to justify what happened in Nazi Germany?
Or
the Japanese concentration camps, right? And some laws are meant to be broken because they are not moral laws. You cannot expect, I just mentioned you this client of mine who's been here for almost 30 years, raised his kids here, pays taxes, abides by the law. Yes, he did overstay his status. He came in on a visa, should have left within 6 months, didn't. But do we think that a person who's been here 30 years and done everything else right deserves a break? I think he does. You may not agree with me, but I don't think that a law that keeps him in unlawful status forever is a just law. And I don't think it squares with my values as an American citizen. And it doesn't square, certainly, with the values of the country that I knew I grew up in. And I believe that it still exists. It exists in this room here, right? And it's out there too, because even the people who support these policies today, if you ask them, they're going to say, I don't want to leave the United States because I know what it stands for. Even though sometimes they don't see it, right, beyond what is actually happening. They don't understand that what is happening is going to take the very thing that they love away from them. Anyway, sorry, you had a question.
No, I just wanted to say, to answer her question about immigration. Ellis Island wasn't established until 1892, and it was only for immigration that came in from New York. During 1840 to 1854, 2.5 million Irish immigrants came to New York alone. My great-grandfather came to Hartford and just walked up.
That's
my
what
grandmother
that-
to Boston.
Got a
My
job,
grandmother
went
to
to Boston
Boston.
with her, and the Chinese had no sense. They just came over and worked.
Yeah.
So all these people that say they did it legal, none of them
That's
did it legal.
right.
If you're Irish, you did not come illegal. Because most of the people that came through Ellis Island were from Italy, Germany, the Slovakia, all the Slav states,
Yep.
and the Balkans and Russia. And when they came over, and here in Boston, and I know this, when the Italians came over, they were not considered white.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
They were not considered.
They're not
white.
considered white. Yep.
Yeah, so what's legal? Who did it legally?
Yeah.
Nobody in the United States, unless you're an indigenous person, did it legally.
Yeah. No, I love that. Yeah.
And when did Native Americans
Was it not-
become citizens?
What is it?
Native Americans weren't citizens initially, right? Right.
Native Americans?
Right.
So the 14th Amendment did not apply to Native Americans, and actually, yeah, they actually passed a federal statute a few decades later that granted them citizenship because they were not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. So yeah, so they didn't become citizens as part of the 14th Amendment, but they were later granted citizenship through an act of Congress. Sorry, there was a question here and there another. Yeah, is it a comment or a question?
Okay, now talking about laws that shouldn't be laws. My great-grandmother, who was, I think, the 8th generation of an American, she died in the 50s. Her first husband died. She was brought up in New Hampshire, 4 sisters. She married a man after her husband died 10 years later from Russia. She lost her United States citizenship. I never heard of that. And then I was looking through the files.
She was born here?
She was born and brought up here, never left the States. She lost it. I actually have her new
Citizenship certificate?
that she was admitted to be a citizen.
Regained the citizen.
I was shocked. I never heard of that.
Did she give up her citizenship, maybe?
I guess she had to
Yeah,
marry him.
yeah. I wonder if that's what happened, that at some point she gave up her citizen. You had a question.
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank you for sharing your experiences and sharing your knowledge and your skills. I guess one of the questions I have, what, if anything, can you advise for people like myself, I'll say with particular expertise, aside from joining protests
Yeah.
and writing letters, any advice you can give us what we could do to help our voices be heard?
Yeah. I definitely think that taking the step to come here and getting more information is definitely appreciated. I'm reading a book by Aviva Chomsky, Salem State professor. It's called Undocumented. It's a great book. Read it if you have the time. It talks a lot about, how we started making immigration legal. I love that book. I think getting information for sure is important. I started, I have a slide here that talks about, immigration reform. There's a bill in Congress right now called the Dignity Act. It doesn't solve everything, but it brings relief to millions of people right now, immediately, and it has bipartisan support. It doesn't offer a pathway to citizenship, and they purposefully did that because they wanted to get it passed. But if this bill passes, through other statutes, it ends up creating pathways to citizenship too, right? So call your congressman, call your congressperson, call your congresswoman, ask for support for a bill like this, or for immigration reform. Talk to your family members. A lot of people do not understand this complex. A lot of people. A lot of people think it's as simple as filling a form and walking into the country. And I get it why people are like, kick them all out. Because if they think they're not even bothered to fill a form, why should I have, right? But that's not it. I mean, I just told you my story. Over 2 decades. It took me 32 years before I became a US citizen. It is crazy. My mother was a citizen, my siblings were citizens. So when you think about these dynamics, right? So I think that indefinitely, I think, people should be more vocal about ICE raids. I don't know exactly. I was just working with somebody today who has a food pantry, who runs a food pantry, and they are concerned that ICE is just going to walk in and detain everybody. Think about, right? Think about this, and so I do think that we got to get this message out, which is why I've been doing a few of these. It's like really to be able to get you going with these conversations to your own social networks. Okay. Any other questions? No.
I have a comment.
Yeah.
When the question is asked, what part of illegal you don't understand?
Yeah.
How looking for a better life can be illegal? Everybody who came to this country came for a better life. White people ancestors came for a better life, and they abused this country. They killed the Indians. In New Mexico, they cut the feet of all the males indigenous people so they will not fight back. How that's not illegal? How Mexicans are illegal when they come and work in a territory that was Mexican?
I mean,
this country created all this damage from the beginning. I am American, and I'm saying every country, like you say, have bads and goods. But it's important to have into account the history of this country. It was built abusing other people. It was built via slavery, dehumanizing people that were not white, because they didn't have the luck to be white. How so many United States, all the history is abuse, not only in this country, but it's in other countries. They go to other countries and they exploit everything. And on top of that, they charge the country for exploiting them. And the countries, the poor countries, I am from Latin America, from South America, and these countries get in debt for the United States getting more and more rich.
I hear your passion, and I'm not going to sit here and deny that throughout our history, we as a nation and our people have committed many atrocities, right? It is true. It's not, and we just talked about the internment camp of Japanese. I wasn't once in Alcatraz. They have a museum to the indigenous people there, and they talk about all the atrocities to the native community of that region. I hear you, and I think, for me, as an American, right? And what moves me every day, and I think that's a lesson in life, is when our ideals were written, when we said all men and women are equal, created equal, right? all men are created equal. Sorry, I added, all men are created equal, right? With rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I read into it all women. I think when we dared to imagine a country, we dared to imagine something that we haven't achieved yet. And I want to believe that by being aware of the things that you are aware, and of the other things that were said here, and of the discussion we had here today, that we're going to work to make this an even better country. I started by saying this country is not perfect by any means, and it's not, and we know that. And I am aware, deeply aware, of the United States' influence in Latin America and what it did with the military coups, right? And how much we funded all of those military governments in Latin America. I absolutely know that. But I cannot stand here and think that that defines my country. That's the only thing that defines my country. Because I don't think it is. Because I do think that, and this is what I'm afraid that we may lose if we don't take care of this, right? I do think that we still are able to gather in a place like this and discuss what kind of country we want it to be and work towards that country. And as slow as immigration history has been.
May I have your attention, please? The time is 8:40 p.m. and the library will be closing at 9 p.m.
Okay, I'm over 10 minutes.
Come to the circulation at this time. All the public computers and printers will begin shutting down 10 minutes before closing. Thank you.
You're welcome. As slow as the movement has been towards immigrants' rights, towards women's rights, towards civil rights, right, towards race relations, I believe we have been making progress. Right now, I don't know what I can say the same thing. Right now, in this moment in time, I don't know that I can say the same thing. And that's what worries me. But I hear you. I hear you. I had a hand here before we close.
Because this will be the last question,
It was
because we're
just-
gonna start keeping
This
this
very
out.
thing, and all the atrocities in the United States, all the hypocrisies, has happened, but every time, like, there was always a major Supreme Court ruling, it was always to push the rights, to give the rights, what was supposed to be the ideas of America, to a few more people. And it's only been in this last Supreme Court that the major rulings are all of a sudden taking away rights, reducing rights that people have found so hard to earn, voting rights, you know, all these different things that obviously they're pulling back on what, on us trying to, like, we've been slowly inching towards an ideal, and it's very slow, expanding rights to everyone, but this is like the first time that there's a real retraction. I think also a big difference in the protests from the last time is now all the major media companies, not just the right-wing ones, but all of them have capitulated completely.
Yeah. Yeah.
And won't even report on the obvious.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of those images you don't see in the media. That's why we brought them here, because you don't see those. And you should be watching those day in, day out. You're right, and you're right that it's very scary what's going on in the Supreme Court right now. I cannot say that historically we haven't been at a moment like this, because we had Dred Scott, right? We had decisions like that that walked.
Vietnam Walk, everybody was out in the streets.
Right. Oh, yeah. That.
TV every day.
Right. That was, and I think that we need more of that now. But.
We have free press.
Yeah.
Free of press.
So, I am not going to keep Liz here for much longer. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you. Thank you. I hope I was able to give you a little bit to get you thinking. Okay?
Where is your firm located?
It's in Southborough. It's in Southborough, right on Route 9. Route 9 and 85. Okay? Thank you.